The next feedback which we received was our rough cut version of our film The Illusion of Existence. We exhibited this to our A2 media class, and it was also recorded on the screen as well. So the first part of feedback in which we received was during the morning sequence of when Mallory gets up, when her alarm goes off, she goes to tap it. Someone in our A2 media class brought up the fact that they thought that it didn't sound appropriate and it didn't seem convincing enough that she was just tapping it. They thought the sound effect for that, it sounded more like a punch instead of just simply tapping it just to turn the alarm off. So what we learned from this was we needed to have a better sound effect which represents the sound of someone tapping the alarm instead of punching it. So what we did with this during the editing improvements in preparation for our final cut, we brought the sound down on it a little bit. We turned it down so it wasn't too loud, so it didn't sound like a punch. So in the end it sounded like someone just tapping it, and it was more believable to the audience. Another part of feedback which we received was that when the next scene in our film goes into the park, someone asked, is it a different day? Because there wasn't an establishing shot to set another day. So they were quite confused as to whether it was just a different day or not, and they suggested having an establishing shot to suggest that it is a different day. So what we learned from this was we need to when it goes into a different day during our film, we need to have an establishing shot. So when it goes into the park scene the next day, we need to have an establishing shot of the park, and also a different music, so the audience get the impression, okay, there's a different park, there's an establishing shot, so it sets the scene, there's different music, so this must be another day. So that's what we did during the improvements for our final cut. We simply filmed an establishing shot of the park, and we also put different music in it, so it was clear to the audience that it was a different day. And also, someone else from our A2 media class also brought up about the sound effects. They said we only had sound effects on limited things, but didn't on anything else. So, like for example, there was sound effects on the kettle when she was turning the kettle on, when the toast pops up at breakfast. But however, there wasn't like sound effects for anything else. There wasn't like sounds of her picking a box up or walking. It just didn't seem. It just seemed a bit limited and a bit random. So what we learned from this was there needs to be sound effects for absolutely everything Mallory does in the film that represents what she's doing and that makes sense to it. So what we did with this was during the editing for our improvements in preparation for our final cut, we put sound effects for absolutely everything, as long as it was convincing enough, as long as it was really needs to put in there. So therefore the final outcome of that was it didn't seem, the sound effects didn't seem limited, and it was all equal enough. Also, another thing that was brought up in our A2 media class was that the following day, after Mallory discovers that Peter Redrum is not even alive, the music all of a sudden is happy, which was it didn't really make sense that there was happy music after Mallory finds out that Peter Redrum is actually not alive. So obviously what we learned from this was we needed to change the music by making it sad, or even still we could just swap the soundtracks around, because it starts off, because what we did in our rough cut was we started off with a soundtrack, a sad soundtrack at the start, and then a happy one in the second half, after she finds out about Peter Edrum not existing. So yeah, what we learnt from this was we needed to, the day after Mallory finds out that Peter Edrum is not even alive, the soundtrack needs to be sad, and also at the start it needs to start off happy. So what we did then, of course, was during the editing we changed the soundtracks. We put a happy soundtrack at the start and a sad soundtrack at the end to represent Mallory's emotions. There's also other feedback in which we received for our group for short film pitch, and we just learned from this what we had to do, and we acted upon this, and we did this during the editing of the improvements for the final